All right, let's jump right into our latest explainer. Today, we're zooming in on a tiny, incredibly wine-rich nation that has basically been playing a game of geopolitical ping-pong for centuries. We are talking about the Republic of Moldova. It's this small, landlocked state in Eastern Europe, tucked right in there between Romania and Ukraine. If you glance at its history, honestly, it reads like a map of giant empires just pushing and pulling against each other. But the real story we're getting into today isn't just about moving borders on a map. It's about a deep, centuries-long struggle over who the people living inside those borders actually are.
To really grasp the stakes here, I want to share this startling anecdote from our source material. A Moldovan professor was recounting her childhood right after the country gained independence in 1991. She lived just 10 miles from the Transnistrian border, and she would literally go to sleep at night to the sound of cannon fire. Think about that for a second. Her childhood reality was shaped by active armed conflict. But as she points out, the most perplexing part is that this wasn't some war over vast reserves of oil or gold. It was a war fought over the very concept of identity.
So you have to ask yourself, why fight a war over identity? How does something as abstract as who we are become the literal battleground for cannon fire and secession? Well, to answer that, we can't just look at the 1990s. We have to rewind the clock. We need to trace this region's incredibly complex history to see exactly how different languages, expanding empires, and clashing political systems layered right on top of each other to create the ultimate identity crisis.
To figure this out, we've got a solid roadmap for today. We'll start way back at the foundational roots, look at the era of competing empires, examine the devastating toll of the Soviet occupation, break down the absolute chaos of independence, and finally look at where Moldova stands today at a major geopolitical crossroads.
Okay, so let's kick things off with where it all began. We're going all the way back to the ancient Dacian tribes to see how this territory first formed its own sovereign identity.
But before we bring in the massive empires that fought over it, take a look at this number, 133. That is Moldova's current global ranking when it comes to physical size. It's only about 11,607 square miles. So, compared to its neighbors, it's pretty tiny. Yet, despite being so small, its location has always made it a massive geopolitical prize. It sits right at the absolute crossroads of Europe, which made it highly desirable real estate for literally any expanding empire looking to control the space between the Carpathian Mountains and the Black Sea.
The foundational roots of a distinct Moldovan identity really kicked off in the mid-14th century. That's when the Principality of Moldavia was officially founded by this bold ruler named Bogdan I, who successfully broke away from Hungarian hegemony. And the rulers who came after him, especially the legendary Stephen the Great, actually expanded the principality's borders. They built dozens of monasteries and turned Moldavia into a major political and religious center that vigorously defended itself against all the converging kingdoms around it. But, as you might guess, that era of strong local autonomy didn't last forever. The region soon found itself caught in a massive geopolitical tug-of-war. Just look at how fast control of this territory shifted. Talk about geopolitical whiplash. By 1512, Moldavia was forced to become a vassal to the Ottoman Empire. Fast forward a bit to 1812, and the Russian Empire swoops in and annexes the central portion of the territory, renaming it Bessarabia. Then jump to 1918, right after World War I, and the territory actually unites with Romania, which kicks off a huge wave of Romanian cultural renaissance. But that only lasts until 1940, when the Soviet Union occupies the territory. Imagine living somewhere where your national allegiance, your rulers, and even your official language change this drastically, this often.
And what's absolutely wild about this is how the literal alphabet used by the people became a weapon of cultural control, completely dependent on whoever drew the borders. When the region united with Romania, they adopted the Latin alphabet and made Romania the sole language of instruction to reconnect with their Romance roots. But during the Russian and later Soviet eras, Cyrillic was aggressively imposed. They enforced Russian orthography and outright banned the Latin script. Why? To sever those ties with Romania and force assimilation into the Russian and Soviet spheres. The empire in charge literally dictated the letters you used to write your own name. Which brings us to one of the most devastating chapters in this history, the Soviet occupation era. Kicking off after the secret 1939 Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact handed the territory directly to the USSR. And listen, this shift to Soviet control wasn't just some bureaucratic change in management. It was brutally violent. By May of 1941, the Soviet secret police, the NKVD, had arrested over 90,000 people in Bessarabia and northern Bukovina. The sheer scale of this repression is just staggering.
The goal was to immediately crush any potential resistance to the newly imposed Soviet regime.
The reality gets even darker when you realize that out of those arrested, at least 60,000 people were deported in just the first half of June 1941 alone. Entire families were ripped from their homes and exiled or sent straight to the gulags. This was a rapid, massive displacement that fundamentally fractured the societal structure of the entire region in a matter of weeks.
So, the crucial takeaway here is that this wasn't just a standard military occupation. It was a deliberate, calculated attempt to erase the memory of the Romanian and Moldavian past. The Soviets actually had a name for this philosophy. They called it denationalization. They systematically targeted teachers, Orthodox priests, landowners, the intelligentsia, basically anyone who carried the cultural memory or historical identity of the region prior to 1940 was branded a kulak or a nationalist and removed. It was all about creating a blank slate for the new Soviet man.
All right, let's fast forward to August 27, 1991. The Soviet Union collapses and Moldova finally declares its independence. But freedom, well, it brought immediate turmoil.
The sudden collapse of the Soviet market plunged this brand new nation into an instant survival crisis. The economy was absolutely devastated. Per capita GDP plummeted to just $300 a year. State planning was totally paralyzed, and hyperinflation was wiping out incomes left and right. But beyond the economics, that deep identity crisis we've been tracking, it exploded into open violence. The eastern region of Transnistria, which was heavily influenced by Russian and Soviet identity, violently seceded. This created a bloody conflict, immediately fracturing the young state with deep interethnic discord and intense political instability.
Out of all that chaos, two primary schools of thought emerged, and they really define the country today. On one side, you have Pan-Romanianism. This perspective views Moldovans as historically, geographically, and ethno-linguistically Romanian, arguing that the nation's true identity is deeply tied to Romania. Then, on the other side, you have Moldavinism. This view sees Moldavans as a distinctly separate, independent ethnic community with its own unique historical trajectory stretching back to the ancient principality, separate from modern Romania. This exact debate over who we are is the very identity crisis at the heart of our explainer today.
And that historical tug-of-war brings us right to the present day, shifting from ancient military conquests to modern 21st century political battles.
Today, the struggle is very much alive, even if the weapons look a bit different. Moldovan elites remain deeply polarized between pro-European and pro-Russian lines. Now, they had a massive milestone back in 2014 by signing an association agreement with the European Union, making a strong push toward Western integration. But it's not a done deal. The state is constantly battling intense Russian disinformation campaigns, the lingering hangover of oligarchic state capture, and, of course, that persistent frozen conflict in Transnistria, where Russian troops are literally still stationed. The historical ping-pong hasn't stopped. It's just taken a modern form.
Which leaves us with this final thought for you to ponder. After surviving centuries of shifting empires, forced deportations, changing alphabets, and economic collapse, where does a nation go next? Does Moldova's future lie in its historical ties to the east, its modern European aspirations to the west, or will it forge a distinctly unique path entirely of its own making? The identity crisis is far from over, for sure, but understanding its roots is the very first step to understanding its future. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep learning.